Hello there, my name is Kevin Leach and I'm here on behalf of my co-authors to describe our work, A Human Study of Comprehension and Code Summarization. As an aside, co-author Yu Huang and I are both on the job market for tenure track positions as well as industrial research positions. Please reach out if you know of any opportunities. So to give you a very high level summary of what we're doing in this summarization paper, we are investigating how well human developers comprehend code snippets that have been augmented either with human written or machine generated summaries. So I want to see the extent to which developers benefit from having comments or summaries that have been automatically generated in comparison to standard human written documentation. So it's well understood at this point that developers benefit greatly from the presence of comments in source code, that this leads to fewer defects, shorter debug cycles. It helps new engineers to onboard faster when they're encountering a new code base for the first time. And all of these contribute to reduced maintenance costs during the software development cycle. Now, unfortunately, developers aren't always great at perfectly documenting all of their source code. That's throughout informal surveys and throughout the literature, comments might be incomplete. They could be missing altogether. They could be outdated, particularly in mature projects, or they could just be flat out wrong. And whatever the case might be, all of these problems with documentation contribute to increased maintenance costs during software development. And while it is possible to incorporate process changes like a more rigorous code review process, or to try and incorporate some style guideline in a company or in a group, ultimately these are difficult to enforce and still may not capture or resolve all of the issues that exist in documentation. So within the software engineering community, researchers have looked at the development of automatic documentation techniques, where the idea is you construct a model that's able to convert some snippet of code into a human readable comment or summary of what that code does. And historically, techniques have taken advantage of assumptions or common practices that occur in some language. So for example, it's very common in Java to name methods after verb-noun phrases such as open file or close socket. And that can help you to develop a summary of what the code is doing if you're able to look at things like method names or perhaps variable names within that method. In addition, techniques have also looked at templates, where you might be able to fill in some English or natural language template with properties or components of the source code under examination. So something like set the variable x to value 5 of type integer. And these techniques can work reasonably well if you're willing to make certain assumptions about the input code or the nature of the summary or comment itself. More recently, the state of the art has turned to neural networks to build up machine learning models that help to predict some summary when given some representation of source code. And this follows some of the work in the natural language processing space, where it's common to use neural networks to help translate, say, from English to French, or to turn large passages of text into shorter summaries, so paragraphs of English into a sentence of English. And so in this community, we've adapted that NLP work to help us essentially translate or summarize on given snippets of code. So rather than translating from English to French, we are in some sense translating from Java to English, or whatever the case might be. And the reason that this has gained so much traction is in part because it has become reasonably efficient to mine software repositories that you could, perhaps scrape GitHub, do a bit of curation to get some well-documented example source code, and then use that to train up a neural network to help predict future summaries of source code. And as recently as last year at ICPC, this has been gaining traction to summarize code in this way. So the idea would be to take a snippet like the code shown here on the left and to turn it into some summary that's natural language string that's readable by a human that helps the developer understand what's going on. And the hope is that the different methods that you use produce different qualities of comments that hopefully match up with some given human written reference summary. And the way that these tend to work is that there's some representation of the source code, like an abstract syntax tree, passed in along with various source code tokens like variable names, and that gets passed through a neural network to help produce some natural language string that summarizes the snippet of code. Now, that brings us to what we're actually looking at in this paper, and we had this observation that state-of-the-art neural models for summarizing code are often evaluated using internal metrics. So in the NLP space, for instance, these translation methods would be evaluated using adaptations of things like precision and recall, and in particular, these two scores, blue and rouge, which are essentially measuring the extent to which the output of a neural network matches up with the ground truth human written correct answer. So in the space of automatic summarization, the idea is that if you have a machine learning model that has a higher blue or rouge score, that means that the summaries that it produces are more likely to overlap with the given ground truth human summary for a given method. And while that may to some extent match with our intuition, particularly in the NLP translation space, it's still an assumption in the context of automatic source code summarization. And so we really want to investigate the validity of this assumption. Is it actually the case that a higher blue or rouge score must imply a better quality comment that would help a developer comprehend a snippet of code better? So in this paper, we're really trying to answer, do automatic summarization tools actually help developers comprehend code better? And we examine this through the lens of 3 research questions. First, do developers better understand code snippets when they're given either human written or machine generated summaries? So how much or how good is it to have a machine generated summary compared to the standard human written summary or comment? Secondly, we wanted to look at the ability of developers to interpret one type of comments or summary as being better than the other. So can developers tell, will a human written summary help you comprehend code better, or does it matter whether it's human written or machine generated or not? Basically, can humans tell the difference, and can they predict whether or not a given summary will actually help them perform a comprehension task better? And then finally, we wanted to look at explicitly these 2 metrics, the blue and rouge scores, and whether or not they're correlated with code comprehension performance. So the way that we conducted this study was that we recruited 45 participants. These were undergraduate students, graduate students, and early professional developers with less than 5 years of experience. This was administered as an online survey where participants would be given a URL that they would go to on the internet and then complete the study at their convenience. And the study itself consisted of the presentation of different Java methods and an associated comprehension task for them to complete. Each participant saw a random 30 Java methods, and then for each of those 30 methods, they were given 3 to 4 Solido-style comprehension questions. Solido is earlier work where they established a suite of comprehension questions that were relevant in an industrial software engineering setting. Now, for each method, critically, we gave the participant either a human written or a machine generated summary. We didn't tell which type they got. It was just randomly assigned to them. And this allowed us to collect a set of data where for each of the methods that we had participant answers where they were given a human written summary, and we also had participant answers where they were given a machine generated summary for the same method, and that allowed us to conduct a comparison between the 2 types of summaries. Now, the type of interface that they were given looked something like in the bottom right here. They were given the comprehension question here at the top. They were given the summary, and again, they weren't told whether it was machine generated or human written. They were given a snippet of code, and then they were given a space to answer the comprehension question down below. We also gave them summaries of any methods that were referenced within the snippet that they were given. And again, these summaries would be either human written or machine generated, depending on what type of summary they got for the method itself, just for consistency and additional context. After collecting all of this data, we had annotators go through and evaluate or grade all of the answers on a scale of 1 to 5 in terms of how well it actually answered the comprehension question. We had 4 annotators do this, and we looked at inter-annotator agreements. We achieved kappa of 0.66, which for a 5-point scale indicates high agreement. So we had a numerical representation of how good each answer was at answering the comprehension question. We also measured time elapsed, and that helped us with filtering out outliers or people that quit early, that sort of thing. And so together, this allowed us to get a robust picture of how well the participant was able to perform a comprehension task. And so for our first research question, we were looking at how well did each participant answer each comprehension task for each code snippet. And again, here, because of the way that we collected data, we were able to compare participant performance when they were given human written versus machine generated summaries. And here what we found was that using our correctness measure from our annotators, we found that human written summaries result in a significant performance boost in terms of completing comprehension tasks with respect to machine generated summaries. So it's better for developers to have human written summaries in a significant way than having machine generated summaries alone. Next, we asked developers to rank the quality of summaries from a scale of 1 to 5, essentially asking them to what extent did that summary help you answer the comprehension question. And here we found no significant difference between human written and machine generated summaries. That is, there's no, developers were not able to reliably predict how good a comment was at helping them complete a comprehension task. And this matches up with existing literature that in general developers' subjective ratings just are not reliable at predicting how well the comments will help them with a comprehension task. And then finally, we looked at the blue and rouge scores for each method's machine-generated summary. And here our hypothesis would be that if a summary is associated with a higher blue or rouge score, that must mean the quality of that comment is better and therefore would help the developer achieve a higher comprehension or correctness score for a given comprehension task. And here we found the opposite, that in fact, blue and rouge scores were significantly uncorrelated with the ability of developers to complete comprehension tasks. And here what we're ultimately finding is that in this community, if we want to continue using neural methods or indeed any sort of summarization technique, that we need better metrics to help evaluate the quality of those models, that blue and rouge scores just aren't telling the whole story, that these are not actually predictors of whether or not a developer will be better at completing a comprehension task. So to summarize this work, this was a human study of 45 developers. We selected from a corpus of 60 methods down to a set of 30 methods for each participant. For each of those 30 randomly selected methods, the participant was asked 3 to 4 Solido comprehension tasks. And we found that developers perform significantly better when they're given human written versus machine generated summaries. That developers' ratings of performance are not significant predictors of comprehension performance. And that developer performance is significantly uncorrelated with blue and rouge scores, ultimately suggesting that our community needs better metrics for evaluating automatic summarization techniques. So with that, I will thank you very much for your time. Again, my name is Kevin Leach, and it has been a pleasure summarizing our work on summarization for you. Thank you.